What up everybody, my name is Zach and welcome back to Case Digital, and in this video we are tackling the question of how do you write a loop in Python. So without further ado, let's hop right in and start coding. What up everybody, so like I mentioned in this video, we are tackling the question of how do you write a loop in Python. But before we get into that, I want to give you a brief overview of kind of what we're going to talk about. Essentially, to write a loop in Python, first you need to know what a loop is, and then we're going to actually touch on the different loop types, and then off of those different subtypes of loops that you can have, we're going to kind of give a brief example of each one of those. So without further ado, let's hop right in and start talking about loops in Python. What up everybody, so like I mentioned, we're answering that question of how to write a loop in Python. But before we do that, we actually need to first tackle the question of, well, what is a loop? And for those of you who know what loops are and just want to know how to use the different subtypes, you can skip ahead using the timeline in the description below. But essentially, a loop is a block of code that is iterated over, multiple times until, a specific condition is met, or until you've reached the desired number of iterations that you want to run. So that is essentially what a loop is, and it is very powerful and used a lot in programming. And so without further ado, let's actually start talking about the different loop types that you can use and implement in Python. So what are the different types of loops that you can have in Python? Well, I like to break it down into basically three main types of loops that you can have. And essentially there are these. There's a for loop, a while loop, and a nested loop. The for loop is primarily used for basically iterating over, for a specific number of times or through a list or dictionary or stuff like that. Whereas a while loop, you can kind of do similar things like that over a specific number of times, but mostly it's you're using it to iterate until a condition is met. And then nested loops is basically using, like you would use a nested loop in the case where, I have to loop through one, and then as I'm looping through the one and getting out the values or going through some sort of condition, like I need to loop through another list and apply, the two list values together or something like that. That's kind of when you would, use a nested loop, is basically when you need to get information from one iteration and put it into something that you also have to iterate through. And that's kind of where you can use the power of nested loops. And so basically that's the three main types of loops that you can have in Python. So let's dive right in and let's kind of start talking about these different types of loops individually. Okay, so let's first start off by using I'm just going to set up a couple of these lists of adjectives and people. And let's first dive into a for loop example of how you'd use a for loop. Essentially, to write a for loop, you have to have the correct syntax. So you have for, and then we can say, you can do this a couple different ways. You can do like I, and then you can say in range, just do the length of people. And this is essentially go, and then colon at the end, and then you can say print, and then you say people of I. Now if we run this, you'll see it prints out John, Jane, and Bob. So basically what I is doing is, when you use a for loop this way, it's going to basically go from starting from 0. And that's what in range does. It goes from 0, and unless you put a specific, starting position in here, but it'll go from 0 all the way to the length, so the number of people. So from 0 to, and again, it'll go from 0 to 3, with 3 being the stopping place. So essentially it's going to do 0, 1, and 2. So we can show that by, we can also print out here, we can also print out I, and you'll see that 0, 1, and 2. And that's important because in Python it's 0 based, and so when you do indexing, and so it's basically going to say, the people list, it's going to at the ith index, so I is 0 when it starts, so that's John, 1 is Jane, 2 is Bob. So that's basically a basic example of a for loop, is essentially I'm looping over a set iteration, which is my list size, and I want to get out all that information out of the list. Now you can do some other things, and we'll create another video where we talk about this further, but you can do some other things where you can write a for loop a different way. It's like for name in people, then print name, and that'll do the exact same thing as before, but without the index information. So you can see I do this first loop with my index information, and the next loop it doesn't have any information, or it doesn't have any index information. And that's something that you can do with lists and dictionaries as well. And so basically that's just an example of using a for loop and how you write a for loop, and a couple different ways you can do so, where you're basically going to iterate through a set number or a set duration of things. And essentially I could also rewrite this too, where I could say in range of 3, and this will do the exact same thing, where it goes John, Jane, Bob, and then John, Jane, Bob for the next one as well. So that's how you write a for loop. A basic way, basically, again, for loops are used for iterating over a certain duration or a specific number of items or numbers to write over basically this one set of code here where I'm just printing something out. So next, let's hop right in and start talking about while loops. Hey, I just want to jump in real quick, say thank you so much for watching the video so far. If it's providing you value, please click that like button below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel so we can learn more about software development and programming. And well, speaking of programming, let's get right back to it. All right, so let's now actually start talking about a while loop and how you use it. Like I mentioned before, while loops are essentially used to iterate over a block of code until a certain condition is met. And so I have this example here where I'm going to create an adjective that's just going to be a blank string, and I'm going to have an index set to 0. Essentially, what I want to do is I want to loop over our adjectives list and print out the adjective until I get to carrying. Once I get to carrying, I want to print it out and I want to stop. I don't want to do anything after carrying. So essentially, if I run this, you'll see that what's happening is I get fun and carrying. If we go back up to our adjective list, fun and carrying are the first two. So there it is, and now I'm done. And depending on where you put this print, you could end up with just seeing fun, and that's because I'm printing out the adjective. It's then going in, it's grabbing the index, which is 0, and 0 of adjectives is fun, so that now adjective becomes fun. I update the index, I come back. Does adjective equal to carrying? No, because at that time we set adjective to fun, then it goes through, and then we print out fun, we come back, and it's now at this point, as it comes through the loop, it's back up, now it's carrying, but we don't print it out. So just keep in mind, like when you're doing some of these loops, you need to keep in mind where to put things if you're trying to print stuff out, or what you're trying to, or setting variables, so that you make sure that like you're not exiting the loop. But essentially, this is essentially what a while loop is. It's basically just I'm iterating over this list until I get to a certain spot, and then I'm exiting. And we could do the same thing here, where I could say this could be fun, and if I run this, I just get fun. I could say that this is loving, and we get all of it, and then it exits. Now, one thing I want to caution you on while loops is if you don't have, like, if your condition will never be met, you could run into a couple of different issues. So for instance, like say I said this is equal to Bob. Now, what should happen is we get an error. And the reason being is because there's no adjective in the adjectives list named with the value of Bob. And so what's going to happen is it's going to keep looping over that list and keep updating the index and basically trying to keep going through each one of these things until it finds Bob. But the problem is there's no Bob. And so it's going to go through the whole list, and then it's going to go here at this next index, and then we're going to get this error because it's out of range for that index, for the list. So that's one thing you need to be careful about using while loops, and with the block of code and what you're doing within that block of code, is that could there ever be a time where you hit a condition where it's just continually going, and parts of that code that you're using could throw an error or throw an exception. Another thing to be careful of is, like, if I want to just keep going over this, so I could just say while true. You need to be careful about this, because this could end up in an infinite loop, and an infinite loop is basically just something that just runs forever until you, basically an infinite loop is like it says, it'll just run forever, and meaning that something you didn't put in your either the condition for your while statement or in your block of code to back out of the loop. And so if I run this, you'll see what's going to happen. In this case, we're going to get another error. But if I were to set this equal to adjective equals the index, and we'll just say that this is 1 for now, and I run this, you'll just see it's continually printing carrying. Now it doesn't look like it's doing much, but now it's this scrolling and I can't catch up. And so what you have to do is you have to Control-C to get out of it, to exit the program, and then that will interrupt it and get out. The other thing that you can do is just to say you can put your condition inside, where you can be like, if adjective equal to say carrying again, then you can do a break, which basically says exit the while loop. And you can use break also in for loops and basically any loops. There's basically a keyword that says exit out of that current loop and continue on. So for instance, and then we could just do down here, we can just say index plus equals 1, put this back to 0, and we should just get fun and caring, just like we saw before, because it's going to continue running, but then we added the condition there to get us out of the loop. And so you have to just, with while loops, you kind of, when you're dealing with looping over stuff until a condition is met, you just need to make sure that you're putting your conditions in the appropriate spots. And with while loops, you can either do that with something like this inside of the loop, or you can put the condition here where we can just do this, and now you don't need this. Oh, excuse me. Well, it's not equal to carrying. You have to change it up a little bit and run that piece of code, and that's what you get. So that's basically how you write a while loop and the different things you can do with it. Again, this is a brief thing of how to write a while loop or how to write a loop and the different ways. So we'll do another video where you kind of dive more into a while loops and basically all these different loops in general. So that's how you write a while loop. Now let's start talking about how you write nested loops. Okay, so when we talk about nested loops, like I mentioned before, it's basically just using either 2 for loops or 2 while loops or a mix and match of the for and while loop to basically loop over or do some type of thing that you're trying to do in those loops. And in this example, basically, I want to loop over, I'm going to set up this example to be like, I'm going to loop over the adjectives and the people and kind of get all the pairings that you can have. So what you can do is you can say, for adjective in adjectives and for the name in people. Now I want you to print out the adjective, or let's do a string. We'll do an F string. If you haven't seen if you don't know what an F string is, basically it's just a formatting string. I have a video on it that talks about strings and the different ways you can write them. But essentially, the F string we're going to say is name is, and then we're going to say the adjective. Now, if we run this, what should happen is something like this, where you get, what's going to happen is going to go through all the adjectives first. So basically we're going to start with adjective 0, which is fun, then we're going to loop through all the names and assign that to it. So as you can see, it goes, in our first name we start off as John, Jane, and then Bob. So you'll see it goes John is, and then fun, because we're going through that first, in this nested loop, we're going through, you go through the first value in one list, and then you go through all, and when you're doing a nested loop, you go through all the sub value or all the values in the next list, and then you go back up to the outer list and you say, give me the next value, and then it goes and runs through all the sub values with that outer value. So what you have here is something like this, where the outer loop is the adjective and the inner loop is the names, and we go outer loop and assign it to all the names. So John is fun, Jane is fun, Bob is fun. The next loop, then we exit the inner loop and then we go back to the outer loop and we say caring, and we assign that to all the values, and so on and so forth. And so that is basically one way to use a nested loop, is to basically go through 2 lists, 2 dictionaries, or whatever, and assign them and take the values in one and use them with the values in another. And that's essentially what a nested loop is. You could do something similar with a while loop. And I can say, let's just do something like while index is equal to 0, or is not equal to 2. And we'll set index value here. We'll set it equal to 0. And then for name in people, whoop, that's not it. In people, we'll do something like this again. And we'll set this to adjectives, and we'll give it index, and then we'll update our index value plus equals 1. So now if we run this, our list should be a little shorter. We should be missing essentially all the loving stuff. Oh, yeah, you can see that we're missing all the loving stuff here because we ran this loop. And sorry, I got confused because I for a second I was like, we should be missing all the loving stuff, and then there's loving right there. And that's because we ran through this, and then we printed everything out, and then we did the same thing here. Now if I commented this out so we're not confused again, essentially you should see John is fun, John is caring, or John, Jane, and Bob are all fun, then they're all caring. And we miss out on loving because this is our condition. We don't want to go past an index of 2 or equal to 2. So basically those are the 2 different examples of how you can use nested loops with for and while. So I would say go practice this with different loops in the programs and the stuff that you're trying to do, and see how you can use these different types of loops and how they can benefit you and help you, whether it's automating something or helping you rather than writing everything out, writing everything out. John is fun, Jane is fun, Bob is fun. Like, you can use a loop, set those values in loops, and then iterate over it and do something like that. So without further ado, go practice this and keep on coding. Hey, thank you so much for coding with me today. I really appreciate it. If this video has provided you any value, please hit that like button. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue our programming journey together. Thank you so much. And again, keep on coding and have a good rest of your day.